So hello friends, we meet after a brief period of delay, okay? And we have started this third term in endocrine system. That diabetes mellitus is going on currently. Insulin portion has been taken up. So I'll be today discussing about oral hypoglycemic agents. Just a bit of recap about the emergency condition that happens in diabetes mellitus, and one of the complications of diabetes mellitus is diabetic ketoacidosis. So as you all know, it is an emergency condition which is characterized by three things. There is hyperglycemia, severe. There is increased presence of ketones both in blood as well as in urine, and there is metabolic acidosis with a large anion gap. The symptoms include dehydration, abdominal pain, vomiting, and altered sensorium. So to treat that, you require regular insulin. Always remember the most common indication for using intravenous insulin is the treatment of diabetic ketoacidosis. Along with that, you need a lot of IV fluids to um, remove or to clear the body of these ketones and to correct the acidosis. Also remember that when the blood glucose level reaches about 200 milligrams, you need to shift from plain normal saline or Ringer's lactate to a fluid which contains 5% glucose in addition to the electrolytes. Okay, so just a recap about insulin. Now, what is the problem with insulin? Like, why do we need oral hypoglycemic agents? Okay, we know that in diabetes there is a deficiency of insulin. Okay, insulin is deficient. So we have availability of insulin. Then, what is the reason why we require agents other than insulin? So the limitations of insulin is that it has to be given by injectable route only. Okay, there is no other alternative as yet. Okay, there are a lot of devices, there are a lot of injection delivery techniques being tried about, but the insulin as of now is being given only by injectable route or parenteral route. So it is painful, and it is painful, and what happens is that sometimes it may need assistance. Okay, you are not able to administer it by self. So self administration is a problem. So to overcome that, we have developed drugs which can be given by oral route. So patient compliance can be made better. But before going into the oral hypoglycemic agents itself, please remember oral hypoglycemic agents, they are only useful for type 2 diabetes mellitus patients. For type 1 or insulin dependent diabetes mellitus patients, insulin is the only option. OHAs or oral hypoglycemic agents are not to be used. That is the only limitation of oral hypoglycemic agent. So, getting all these things in mind, now we go or move on to oral hypoglycemic agents. Okay, so the classification is something like this. Sulfonylureas, one of the most important components of oral hypoglycemic agents is glimepiride, glibenclamide, glipizide, polybutamide, chlorpropamide. Then you have biconides, or also known as AMP kinase activators, fenformin, metformin. Again, one of the most important oral hypoglycemic agents. Current clinical practice, almost every type 2 diabetic patient, unless contraindicated or not able to tolerate, is prescribed metformin. So very important drug. Next group is meglitidenide analogs. You have repaglinide, natagalinide. Then you have isoridinidiones, pioglitazone, rosiglitazone, and alpha glucosidase inhibitor. You have acarbose. Some newer agents, you have GLP-1 analogs, exenatide. You have DPP-4 inhibitors, sitagliptin and vildagliptin, and finally IAPP analog pramlin. Right. We will see this also in short at the end of this lecture, but we will focus mainly on this group of drugs. Out of that, 1, 2, and 3, all these three are very, very important. So before going on to the individual drugs, let's see what is type 2 diabetes exactly. Okay, so in type 2 diabetes mellitus, unlike a type 1, there may be two types of dysfunction. It may be either due to a beta cell dysfunction, that is improper insulin release. Okay, insulin is released not adequately or not in synchronization with the increased blood glucose level. So there is some level of beta cell dysfunction in the pancreas. And second problem is the presence of insulin resistance. That is, whatever amount of insulin is being released by the pancreas is not able to perform its function appropriately and adequately. What could be the reason? Reason could be simple, it could be a defect at the level of receptors or it could be at the cellular level problem. And most of the type 2 diabetes mellitus patients, they have, in addition to diabetes mellitus, obesity. That means they are obese. Again, this obesity leads to increased insulin resistance. So basically, it forms a vicious cycle. Okay. So the two main disorders or two main problems with type 2 diabetes mellitus is one is insulin resistance and second one is improper insulin release or in short beta cell dysfunction. So the complications of diabetes mellitus. So if the blood sugar level control is poor, okay, if the glycemic control is poor, then in the long run it leads to a lot of complications at the level microvascular as well as macrovascular. At the level of microvascular, it leads to nephropathy, neuropathy, and retinopathy. So basically, in diabetes, three organs are targeted, that is the eyes, kidneys, and peripheral nerves. And macrovascular complication, it leads to coronary artery disease. It leads to atherosclerosis because of abnormalities in the regulation of lipid levels. So leads to atherosclerosis, deposition of atherosclerotic plaques in coronaries, giving rise to coronary artery as well as cerebrovascular disease. So how we treat type 2 diabetes mellitus? Two strategies. Either we can improve the insulin release, that is we give drugs that stimulate the beta cells of pancreas to increase insulin release. These drugs, they are known as insulin secretagogues. That is, they increase the level of insulin secretion from the beta cells of pancreas. Or the second strategy is what we can do is that we can overcome the insulin resistance. The existing problem, we can try and give drugs which revert this insulin resistance. So we have two group of drugs which revert insulin resistance, and one of which, the most important one, is bicarbonate metformin. And finally, when the drugs which we are giving, the oral hypoglycemic agents, if they are unable to control the blood glucose in the normal range, then we have at the end insulin itself. So at the end, just like type 1, we have to switch the patient to insulin itself. See, please remember all these drugs as well as insulin, they only relieve the symptom and they keep the blood glucose level in a tight normal range. They do not cure the disease. The underlying pathology is not at all cured. It progresses with time. So first foremost is sulfonylureas. Okay. So this is the structure of a beta cell of pancreas. So normally what happens is whenever we ingest glucose or whenever the glucose is released by the liver through gluconeogenesis and there is increased blood glucose level, what happens is some of the glucose enters the beta cell through this GLUT1 transporter. It undergoes glycolysis, leading to generation of ATP. Okay. Now this ATP, what it does is it closes this potassium channel. This channel is known as ATP dependent potassium channels. So ATP, if the level of ATP increases in the beta cell, there is closure of this potassium channel. Increased potassium inside the beta cell leads to depolarization. So there is opening of calcium channels. Calcium comes inside, binds with the granules, binds to this membrane, degranulation occurs, and there is release of insulin. So this is the normal beta cellular function. Now, where do our sulfonylureas come into picture? Okay. So sulfonylureas bind to this ATP sensitive potassium channel. There is a sulfonylurea receptor binding site. These drugs bind on this ATP sensitive channel, and just like ATP, they also block this channel. So once this channel is blocked, there is no potassium going out from the beta cell. There is increased potassium levels inside the beta cell, degranulation and insulin release. So sulfonylureas are insulin secretagogues. That is, they increase the secretion of insulin. Sulfonylureas are insulin secretagogues. Their pancreatic action is through binding on the sulfonylurea receptor, which is present on ATP sensitive potassium channel. Block this channel leads to release of insulin. After months of therapy, after years of therapy or months of therapy, the secretagogue action of sulfonylureas decline, but there is some extra pancreatic action. It leads to sensitization of target tissues, and there may be increased number of insulin receptors or increased post-receptor action, leading to increased activity of the released insulin. These are the pharmacological actions of sulfonylurea. Other than insulin and insulin release, there is no action of sulfonylureas in the body. So sulfonylureas, they have been classified into two generations. One is the first generation, which includes the chlorpropamide and polybutamide, both of which are no longer in clinical use. The major problem is chlorpropamide is very long acting, it is highly potent, so it can lead to prolonged hypoglycemia, and it has ADH like action. Also, chlorpropamide can cause hepatitis, so it can lead to cholestatic jaundice. So both of these drugs, they are not used. Currently, we use these second generation compounds, out of which glimepiride, gliclazide, glibenclamide, and glipizide. These are the four compounds which are commonly used, and the advantage is low incidence of hypoglycemia. Adverse effects, because sulfonylureas they release insulin, it can have adverse effects similar to insulin, and the most common adverse effect of insulin is hypoglycemia. So sulfonylureas, the most common adverse effect is hypoglycemia. What are the symptoms of hypoglycemia? So two types. It could be sympathomimetic, or it could be sympathetic symptoms, or it could be neuroglycopenic symptoms. The sympathetic symptoms include tremors, tachycardia, palpitation, sweating, headache, confusion, while the neuroglycopenic symptoms include confusion and pale face, feels weak, dizziness, and if not treated or corrected promptly, if it advances, it can lead to more CNS symptoms like confusion, convulsions, coma, and ultimately death. Okay. So, how to prevent it? Timely taking of the medicine along with meals. So, you have to time the meals and medicines adequately. Then, take a proper meal if you have taken the full dose of the drug. Not to skip a meal. if you have taken the drug and any chocolates or any sugary substance along with you, so that if you feel any of the symptoms mentioned above, the patient should immediately take the either sweet or chocolate. So it immediately corrects hypoglycemia. So these are the precautions that have to be advised to the patient while prescribing sulfonylurea. Other symptoms include allergic rash, skin rashes. The two most common side effects of sulfonylureas are hypoglycemia and allergic skin rashes. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea can happen. Yes. With chlorpropamide, it can lead to ADH-like action and cholestatic jaundice. So in short, just to a brief recap of sulfonylureas, they bind to sulfonylurea receptors. They are insulin secretagogues. After this binding, they block the ATP sensitive potassium channels. Okay, they have a secretagogue action. Two generations are there, and hypoglycemia is its most common adverse. Second generation, the next group of drug is metformin. See, I mentioned here on this slide, it is number one. That means one of the most commonly prescribed anti-diabetic drug is metformin. Always remember this. Okay. Type 2 patient, new type 2 patient, metformin is always prescribed. Okay. This is its mechanism of action. It activates AMP dependent protein kinase. Okay. So what are its effects? Activation of this AMP dependent protein kinase leads to two different things. The most common and most important one is decreased gluconeogenesis from the liver. This is the most important thing. So there will be no breakdown of glycogen or fatty acids or amino acids, and there will be no generation of new glucose. It stops the gluconeogenesis. The second thing what it does is it sensitizes the muscle and fat to insulin, and there is increased uptake of glucose from the blood into muscles and fat. Okay, so you can see that it does not induce the release of insulin, but it it helps insulin or it sensitizes the target tissues to insulin. So in short, it decreases insulin resistance. And most important thing about metformin is it delays micro and macrovascular complication. So any diabetic patient, type 2 diabetes patient, prescribed metformin, it will delay all the microvascular, that is neuropathy, nephropathy, and retinopathy, and cardiovascular disease when it is given to or prescribed to type 2 diabetes patient. So that is the advantage of metformin, and that is why it is always prescribed to a type 2 diabetes patient unless it is contraindicated or not tolerated. So just a brief recap, it is a AMPK activator, it activates the AMP dependent protein kinase. There will be decreased gluconeogenesis, which is the major effect. Second thing it does is increases insulin sensitivity. So there will be increased utilization of glucose and uptake of glucose into muscles and adipose tissue. And finally, it delays both micro as well as macrovascular complications. Adverse effects. The most common adverse effect of metformin is not hypoglycemia. Why? Because it does not release insulin. It does not affect the normal blood glucose level. Only it stops the new glucose from being entering into the bloodstream, as well as it helps in removing the excess glucose into muscles and adipose tissue, and thus it maintains normal glycemia. So there is little effect of blood glucose in normal glycemic states. Adverse effects include lactic acidosis. This side effect is more with fenformin. It was a previous generation compound, not used nowadays. Only metformin is used, and there may be incident of megaloblastic anemia because Um, Metformin interferes with the absorption of vitamin B12, leading to deficiency, leading to megaloblastic anemia. Another more common side effect with metformin is GI related, that is, it can lead to nausea, it can lead to diarrhea, it can lead to abdominal pain and fullness. So, GI side effects, lactic acidosis, and megaloblastic anemia are the adverse effects of metformin, most common of which are GI side effects. The next group is again an insulin secretagogue, that is meglitinide analogs. You have repaglinide, nateglinide. Actually similar to that of sulfonylurea, that is they block the ATP sensitive potassium channel located in beta cells of pancreas. Only difference is the binding site. They bind to site other than that of sulfonylurea receptor. Rest everything remains the same. Another difference between meglitinide analogs and sulfonylureas is their shorter duration of action. Sulfonylureas, they are longer acting. They need to be given only twice a day or once a day. This have to be given at least 3 times each before a major meal. So they are mainly used for control of postprandial hyperglycemia. That is, after meal hyperglycemia can be controlled with meglitinide analog. As such, no other clinical use. And also very difficult for chronic management of diabetes patients. Next group is PPAR gamma activators, also known as thiazolidinediones. Okay, tongue twisters, thiazolidinediones. We have rosiglitazone, thioglitazone. What is this PPAR? Peroxisome proliferator activated receptors. So basically, these PPAR is a group of receptors which are present inside the cell, present in the cytoplasm. Any ligand which activates this receptor, what they do is they control gene expression. That means they control the expression of various type of proteins. So in this case, the PPAR type gamma, what it does is once it is activated by this ROSI or pioglitazone, it leads to synthesis of GLUT4 transporters in muscles and adipose tissues. So what it does is there will be increased glucose uptake from the blood into the muscles and adipose tissue. Also, it promotes differentiation of adipocytes and maturation of adipocytes. So there will be increased fatty acid uptake and there will be increased storage of triglycerides into these adipocytes. Again, these drugs do reduce insulin resistance by increasing glucose uptake. So these are just like metformin, they decrease insulin resistance. Problem with this drug, yes, these are insulin sensitizers, they decrease insulin resistance. Problem with this drug is this weight gain. Okay. It can lead to fluid retention, so can cause edema, and very cautiously used in congestive cardiac failure because fluid retention is already there in congestive cardiac failure. It will worsen the failure. Long term, there is risk of osteoporosis as well as anemia. There will be weight gain, and rosiglitazone has been banned because in studies it has been found to be associated with increased risk of myocardial infarction and death. So rosiglitazone is not available. Pioglitazone is still available and it is widely prescribed. So small recap. AMPK, that is AMP dependent protein kinase activator, you have metformin. How does it act? So it decreases liver gluconeogenesis by activating this enzyme, and it sensitizes the muscles and adipose tissue to the action of insulin. Thus it increases uptake of glucose in these tissues. Meglitinides, that is repaglinide, nateglinide, both they block the potassium, ATP sensitive potassium channel just like sulfonylurea. Only difference is in their binding site and the duration of action. PPA gamma activators 5 and rosiglitazone. Again, they are insulin sensitizers. What they do is they increase the expression of PPR and GLUT4 transporters in muscles and adipose tissue. The next group is alpha glucosidase inhibitors. We have acarbose. So these alpha glucosidases, these are enzymes that are present in the intestine for the digestion of polycarbohydrates into monocarbohydrates. Okay. So polysaccharides, they are digested into monosaccharides by the help of this alpha glucosidases. Inhibition of this enzyme, what happens is it inhibits the breakdown of polysaccharides, so the absorption of carbohydrates from the GI tract is slowed down and they are transited to the large intestine. Okay. They are used as oral drugs and the only indication is to prevent postprandial hyperglycemia. Have to be given before each major meal, at least half to 1 hour before every major meal, because the enzyme has to be inhibited just before the food reaches the intestine. Okay. The adverse effects of these drugs are mainly GI. Majority of acarbose is not absorbed, so GI side effects will be due to the all the polysaccharides that remain undigested. They reach the large intestine where they are fermented by the bacteria present in the large intestine, causing bloating, flatulence, fullness in the stomach, and constipation. All these are side effects of carbs. Okay. So the last portion of oral hypoglycemic agents is incretins. What is this incretin? Incretin is intestine causing secretion of insulin. So which can lead to there are certain substances which can lead to the secretion of insulin from the intestine. Okay. These substances, one such example is glucagon-like peptide or GLP-1. So what are the pharmacological actions or what are the physiological actions of incretin? They increase insulin release, they decrease glucagon release, and they decrease appetite, that is, they decrease food intake. All these incretins they have similar effect. So GLP-1 or glucagon like peptide 1, what happens is it is rapidly metabolized by DPP4 enzyme, dipeptidyl peptidase 4 enzyme. So this action of GLP-1, which was this, okay, it was this action. It lasts only for a few seconds. So its half-life is about 1 to 2 minutes. Now, we can do two things, and we can use analogs of GLP-1 which are not metabolized by DPP4, or we can inhibit this enzyme so that the duration of action of natural GLP-1 increases. So we have both these strategies and we have drugs for both. We have exenatide, which is a GLP-1 analog. It is not metabolized by DPP4. The only problem with exenatide is it is not available orally. It has to be given by subcutaneous injection. But this DPP4 inhibitors, dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitors, sitagliptin, saxagliptin, vildagliptin, they are available as oral tablets. So these are more in clinical use. Incretin therapy, GLP-1 analog, exenatide, liraglutide, they have effects similar to GLP-1. They increase insulin release, so insulin secretagogue, decrease glucagon release, and decrease appetite. Have to be given subcutaneously and usually used as an add-on therapy with metformin and sulfonylurea in type 2 diabetes patients. DPP4 inhibitors, again same actions, increase insulin release, decrease glucagon release, and decrease appetite. They inhibit the metabolism of GLP-1. So natural GLP-1 glucagon like peptide, its duration of action increases. To be used as an add-on with metformin or sulfonylureas in type 2 diabetes patient, usually used as an add-on drug, not as a monotherapy. Please remember this is very costly. Okay, DPP-4 inhibitors are costly. And finally, we have pramlintide or synthetic amylin. What it does is this decreases glucagon secretion, it delays gastric emptying, and it promotes satiety. So the amount of food intake decreases. Very rarely used again as an add-on in type 2 diabetes patient, but it has to be given by subcutaneous route. So it is not compliant to the patient. Self-administration may be a difficult. And the newer ones, these are some new drugs, SGLT2 inhibitors, sodium glucose transporter type 2, enagliflozin, dapagliflozin. What they do is, now these SGLT2 inhibitors, they are present in renal tubules. The role is to reabsorb the filtered glucose. Okay. SGLT2 inhibitors, they do not allow the reabsorption of filtered glucose from the tubular lumen. So there will be increased excretion of glucose in urine. There will be induced glucose urea. Okay. There are study for type 2 diabetes mellitus. Majority of the studies have failed for these two drugs. The major limitation of these two drugs is because there is increased glucose presence in urine, it can lead to urinary tract infections. You just need to remember these names: canagliflozin and dapagliflozin. So how will we treat type 2 diabetes mellitus patient? A newly detected type 2 diabetes mellitus patient, uh, first and foremost thing is to provide education related to diabetes mellitus. You need to inform the patient regarding what the disease is, how it will behave, what is its progress, what are the complications, and how we can manage and control it. So education, dietary and lifestyle modification is the first thing. Many patients can be controlled with these two things alone: education, diet, and lifestyle modification with exercise. It can lead to control of this particular condition. If not controlled, usually start with metformin, single drug. Again, if not controlled, you add another drug, usually sulfonylureas. If not controlled, then you either go with metformin and sulfonylureas and another third drug, or you can directly switch over to metformin and insulin. Usually, this is the flow chart that has to be followed. If you have any queries, then you can call me on this, or you can ask or WhatsApp on this. And thank you very much. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.